people. There are so many conversations being had out there about unplanned pregnancy, right? So many opinions, so many agendas, but there are no conversations being had like the ones we're having right here. You know how I know? Because these conversations are telling the truth. The truth as it is told in two ways. First, the truth of my own personal story as told in my autobiography. You are not disqualified reclaiming the God's promises in your unplanned pregnancy, and the truth about who you are as told by the Word of God. In the following episodes, you will hear from women just like me who have experienced the realities of unplanned pregnancy in all different situations from all different backgrounds, experiencing the same feelings. The intention in having these conversations on a public platform is to have these conversations on a public platform. We believe that faith comes by hearing. And so we encourage you to listen to Life Unexpected podcast with the expectation that it will bring you faith in your situation today. All right. So today I want to do something a little different on Life Unexpected podcast in consideration of International Women's Day and Women's History Month. I wanted to dedicate this episode to all the amazing women that have come through Unexpected Ministries podcast and, Life Unexpected and shared their stories with us. I believe that by documenting our experiences and documenting our stories, not only is there a power and a charge within them for the next women who come behind us, right? For deliverance and for healing and for identification, right? There is also something new that's happening with all this multimedia and distribution and technology that we have. Whereas in generations before, so many women's stories weren't documented. Their existence wasn't documented, right? And maybe we hear about the prominent women. See, now this is interesting because off the top of my head, I can't name any women, but I know that there are some. That's just my lack of ignorance. But I'm thinking of Maya Angelou, and that's the only one that comes to my mind right now, right? But my point I'm making is that the amazing and powerful stories of the everyday woman, right? We talk about being pioneer women, breaking boundaries, being the first. And that was happening on an everyday basis within the American home, right? Since this country was founded, and none of those stories are documented, right? I have been reflecting lately on the women of the late 1800s, early 1900s in the Western frontier, right? The early settlements of the West in this country. And you can open any textbook, you can click on any history channel, look in any documentaries, on that time period, that era, and you'll find a long list of all the men, Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, Billy the Kid, right? Well, these names just kind of are associated with that. And then when I look for the stories of the women that were back at those homesteads, it's far and in between, right? I want to hear, I don't know about you, but I want to hear the stories of the women that were promised this, abundant life and this freedom and this new territory and this unknown land, and they're following their husband and they have baby in tow and they're traveling in a wagon and they're settling out in this, vast land, learning how to till the land, learning how to make essential, living with water and food from this new barren place that they've landed in, right? And their husbands don't come back, or they leave for the day and they don't come back, and now they're pregnant and they have two babies to feed, and now they're tending a garden, and they're tending the vegetable farm in their backyard, and they're hoping to keep their horse or maybe get a horse, and they're hoping to get some cattle and be able to just survive out there, right? And all the enemies that were going on, right? And I'm just thinking of a daily routine of myself as a mom trying to wake up and get a cup of coffee in me, get some scriptures in me, and then drive the kids around and get them to school and just do the grocery shopping, clean the house, and then work a bit in my business and earn an income for the family, right? And be a good example, like all these things. And I'm overwhelmed. And I feel like this is too much for a woman to carry, right? So I'm looking for those stories. Well, how did Jane of the West in 1930, 1920 manage her daily routine? What did her daily routine look like? What kind of mother was she? What kind of wife was she? How did she stand by her man? How did she maintain her faith in God, right? How did she care for these babies? And just making babies. No birth control. We're not talking about abortions. We're not talking about birth control. We're not talking about safe sex. We're not talking about unprotected sex. We're talking about babies are just being made, right? In all sorts of situations, right? And so being a caregiver, and oh my goodness, I'm thinking of all the roles of these women, and where are their stories? Where are their stories? Far and few in between. I'm not ignorant to know that there are some documented, and I've seen some in media represented, but how accurate are they? Are they hearsay from the men that knew them, from the husbands that knew them? So I'm looking for the opportunities today for women today to make sure their stories are documented, because I feel like every one of them has power in them for the transformation of the mind, right? And the deliverance of our spirits just through our experiences. We're women of God. Every day we're giving this, we're seeking and seeking more. We're asking to know him better, right? We're asking for less of ourselves and more of him. And what does that look like today? And as we sit here and with the blessing and the gratitude for media, it is so important for us to just exhaust the possibilities of recording our stories, right? So maybe 30 years, 40 years, 50 years from now, this little tidbit of sound drops into, by God's grace, a woman who is struggling, decades from now, and can relate. Because I think the human experience is what really is translatable in all of our stories, right? And so today I want to just highlight briefly each of the speakers that have been here and tell you what I've learned from them, what I got out of their stories, right? And so just to reset for a moment, this is Life Unexpected podcast, and we are a branch of Unexpected Ministries. We serve young women affected by unplanned pregnancies with resources, mentorship, education. And you can find out more about that at unexpectedministries.xyz. We also offer a ebook on Kindle called You Are Not Disqualified, Claiming the Promises of God in Your Unplanned Pregnancy. And that is one of the ways we raise money for our ministry. And you can also go over to our website and donate if you feel that God is in that for you. And so as we continue on this International Women's Day, I want to encourage you to go back and listen to some of the stories previously shared up to this point on our podcast. First that comes to mind is one of my very first guests when we launched this whole thing. And her name was Ladora. And in a nutshell, you can go back and you can listen to the full episode, and hear from her own lips. But I want to tell you the power of the story that she shared with me and what it left with me, right? And how I transcended in my life to the next level of understanding about these experiences as women with unplanned pregnancy, right? And so Ladora was praying and praying for a child and wasn't able to, right? And she said that she went to church and gave her last 10% to God. And by that, she didn't mean that she reached in to her pocketbook, took 10% out of her income and gave it to the church. No, by that, she meant all she had left of her faith, right? All she had left of her belief in God's promises was 10%. She was running on empty. And she just said, God, take it. Take my 10%. It's all I have to give you, And without planning it or, knowing that she was pregnant, when she was feeling ill and went to the doctor, she got the diagnosis of that she, would be expecting a baby. And this is the way that I've learned that God moves in our lives. It's when we have come to the end of everything that we can do within our own power, within our own abilities, with our own finite understanding and limited resources, right? Wavering belief. And when we finally abandon ourselves from all of that and surrender to the possibility of something happening that makes no sense, right? That maybe isn't even what we would choose of ourselves, is when God has the ability to step in, It is a complete abandonment of self that God needs in order to show his full power in our lives, all right? Now I'm thinking of another guest we had, Crystal, who has shared a couple of times on our podcast. I encourage you to go back and listen. And she was coming from an upbringing, much like myself, of very rigid faith. Her father was a pastor, right? She was given an example of what God looks like from a very early age. And yet when she found herself pregnant at 18, I believe it was, and went to those people who she had faith in and trust in to provide and take care of her and where her safety was, a man of God, a woman of God, going to her parents, she was abandoned, right? And what that looks like as part of God's plan is that, what we have to give up in order to receive what God has for us, right? And so I can absolutely relate to Crystal on so many levels. Our stories are so parallel in so many ways. And she reminded me that God was pulling me towards dependence on him and trust in him. The consistency of his show up, right, was something that I didn't know, that Crystal didn't know. We only had the example of what the church showed us, who God was, right? the rituals, the practices, the certain verbiage that you use in certain contexts with certain people, right? What that was all the limited example of what God was, until we were put in a position to abandon what we knew God to be, right? And God comes in and says, well, let me give you another alternative here. Let me show you something different about me. Let me show you what else I can do here. Like, that's fine. That's nice. But again, this complete abandonment of what we think we know to be true. And God can come in and sweep up. Right? Oh my goodness. I'm thinking of so many powerful stories that have come through. Victoria, who's shared her own story of, having her own plans, right? As women, we are blessed to live in an era where we can pursue careers, we can pursue financial independence, we can pursue education, right? And with all those plans in place, coming out of high school, coming out of college, we're ready to go. And then finding out you're pregnant unexpectedly, all those plans are put on the shelf. That's just the reality of it. I understand we've all accomplished and come very, very far. It wasn't the end of the road. It was just a detour. And if you listen to the stories, you'll hear, what God's detour was. But again, the abandonment of the plans that we have for our lives, right? And these goals that we're setting, and that these income generating destinations, we have over our lives, and we're pursuing, and we feel like this is the ultimate of success, right? And then insert pregnancy and a baby, unplanned, and there's a massive detour that takes, right? Again, God's showing us that his plan is bigger and greater, right? The first time I got pregnant when I was 18, I was, it was between freshman year and sophomore year of college. I was there on scholarship. I had plans to become a teacher. I was pursuing music, so I had a minor in that. I was engaged to my high school sweetheart. He was pursuing his career in the military, and we had plans, right? We had plans. I think right before I got pregnant, I was going to move down to North Carolina and leave. I was 19 that summer. So, it was time to leave home and kind of move on to like an adult life. And getting pregnant unexpectedly, I was told that, well, that would be it. Well, there goes that, right? There goes the job. There goes the career. There goes the financial independence. There goes your future plans. There goes your dreams. That's that. Because a baby means you don't get that. You don't get to have any of that, right? And I believe that's the enemy and the lies, and the deceit of the shame that comes with unplanned pregnancy that blocks us from making us feel like we are now to abandon anything that we desire. And all of us is going to go to these babies, right? Well, the devil is a liar, because I'm sitting here and with multiple successful businesses over the past 2 decades, right? Grown healthy children, prosperous life. None of that, those lies came true. They all came up empty. And I heard the same in Victoria's. She's a successful coach. She's a mother of a beautiful, healthy boy. She's in a happy marriage. None of these things. She finished her education, stopped what God's plan was for her, right? Despite the lies of the devil, right? And then Kelly's story, again, go back and listen to these amazing women who are making history by sharing their stories, right? Kelly came to me with, I feel, and she can hear, if she's listening, she can get back to me on this. A lot was revealed to her about her story while she was telling it, which happens often. And she was giving up hope in relationships, right? Hope in partnership, hope in God's plan of, marriage and a home and what that looks like, because it was only based on what her experiences had been that far, and it wasn't until, and she desired children, and wasn't until she came to a bottom, really, I'm going to say, that, again, abandoned the faith and the hope that she was feeling and in its strength, and was kind of bringing in its little kindlings back to the church, back to the women in her life, or two new women in her life that showed her what it looks like to have a whole bunch of life going on and maintain your faith in the promises of God, right? Again, women that came before her that have been where she's been were the difference in her life. That's why it's so important for us to share these things, And then she was able to find a man of God. God put somebody in her life that shared her faith, that had similar stories, and she's married with children and a successful entrepreneur, right? And all these women share this camaraderie, really, of a sinking ship, a abandoned mindset of everything that you think you know before, and then God brings you to a space of unplanned. It doesn't matter, really. Well, this podcast is for unplanned pregnancy specifically, but it really doesn't matter. I always say God comes along and smacks you up the back of your head because it was unplanned, right? And in every single one of our stories, it is the triumph and the victory of coming to a space of complete, being forced, but complete abandonment of what we think we know God to be by what we've experienced to Him in our lives and the examples we've been given up to that point. Right? And then insert unexpected, and He takes you on a whole new journey of much more than you could have ever planned. Right? And so it's on this International Women's Day that I'm reflecting back on all the amazing, beautiful women that have the boldness and the courage to publicly share what their experiences are and the messiness of it and the emotions of it that come up, right? So that we have the privilege of finding identification in the human part of their stories, right? And leaving a legacy of what that looks like to stand in boldness, speak your truth, claim who God is, claim our identity in God, and start to change the dialogue and change the conversation around the topic of unplanned pregnancy and who the women are behind these stories, right? And so on this Women's History Month, I encourage you to make history. Make history. There's power in your story. There's power in everything you've experienced to this point. And sifting through that by sharing it and documenting it, whether you're an author, you're a podcast host, you're a speaker, whatever that is for you, but just documenting what your experience has been with life and its unexpected challenges and the hope and the God within it will rise to the surface every time. Yeah. So I hope that this episode has helped you reflect on some women in your life, maybe that need encouraging, sharing their own story, or that have shared their story with you that have made a powerful impact in your relationship with God today on this International Women's Day. It makes me so excited to even say those words. And I encourage you all to move forward in this day, in this week, in this month, encouraging the women around you to make history. Thanks for joining us today. Life Unexpected podcast cannot thank you enough for spending your time here with us today. If you know of anyone that can benefit from the resources shared with you here, please share this out. Absolutely subscribe and join us here again next Wednesday. If you're interested in supporting our ministry, just head on over to any of the social media platforms and look for Unexpected Ministries. You can find resources there. And head on over to Kindle and Amazon to purchase your copy of You're Not Disqualified. And we continue to pray for you in your situations and in your families too. Thank you so much for joining us today. God bless.
You are listening to Yours Live Worldwide Podcast.